no happiness or fulfillment is possible outside the group. I remember so many times of people talking about the spirit and how you could tell people, in the church how they had the spirit with them. And it was just always so much better, which now I look at and I think, oh, that's the cult identity replacing your personality. Tingles with flyby. Daily ASMR videos. Hello, my tinglings, and welcome to our fourth and final part of assessing Mormonism with the Bite model. For those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Jenny. I grew up in the Mormon church. I'm a multi-generational Mormon, and I left the church when I was 25. And yeah, we've been going through this. So there's 3 parts before this, where we talk about different control mechanisms that cults can use to replace your authentic identity with a cult identity. Today, we're going to be talking about emotional control. So, and then we'll do a little review. So, just real quick. So, for behavior control, Mormonism at 12 out of 19. Information control, 13 out of 19. Thought control, it was 11 out of 11. So, very a lot of thought control. And then our last one today is going to be emotion control. So let's get started. Number 1 is manipulate and narrow the range of feelings. Some emotions and or needs are deemed as evil, wrong, or selfish. And this makes me just think actually of both my grandma and of me. So she had a therapist and she was asked to draw sadness, happiness, and anger, and she couldn't draw anything for anger because she's been so suppressed and so told that anger was bad to have that she couldn't even draw something. And I remember her telling me this as a kid, and I could think of, a volcano, and I was like, oh yeah, like I could visualize what I would draw for anger. But it was interesting when I was in therapy, when I was about 21, right after I'd married my ex, and I could not be angry with him. I felt like it was a bad thing to be angry with him. And my therapist said, well, why aren't you allowed to be mad? And that was kind of a big revelation to me. But that, part of that is encouraged by Mormonism, is that being slow to anger, and that anger, you don't want to be wrathful or, So definitely that you're not supposed to be angry is a big one, but there are other ones as well. But we'll stick with that one. Number 2, teach emotion-stopping techniques to block feelings of homesickness, anger, and doubt. And I'm sure they do, but I'm not actually aware enough to know exactly what the emotion-stopping techniques are. So, I would know, that you're supposed to just go out and serve people, read your scriptures, pray, all that sort of thing. Keep yourself busy. But I don't know that one specifically, but I definitely, my intuitive sense is that that is massive, which is, I think, partially why I'm not coming up with a direct example. So it's funny because right after I finished that bit, my memory ran out, so I had to get off and move some files, so I was not recording for a little bit, but I just found myself singing this song that goes, "Ere you left your room this morning, did you think to pray in the name of Christ our Savior? Did you sue for loving favor as a shield today?" The really more key part is the chorus. Oh, how praying rests the weary. Prayer can change the night to day. So when life gets dark and dreary, don't forget to pray. I whisper sing so that I don't get picked up for copyright because it's so annoying to deal with. So that's definitely a way that's used to block, bad feelings. When life gets dark and dreary, well, just pray. So there's one way. So number 3 is make the person feel that problems are always their own fault, never the leader's or the group's fault. So there's a huge power structure within the church that you go to a bishop, and then there's the stake president, all this on up, and it's a very top-down power structure, so there's not a lot of redress to kind of appeal to a higher decision or that sort of thing. You're very locked into kind of the bishop is God in the ward. Not technically, but that's kind of the feeling, is that the bishop that's a huge role. And so there's kind of this feeling, even though, we're men too, we have our own problems and all that, but there's this undercurrent and they're treated like they're infallible. And prophets are definitely treated as infallible. So the quorum of the 12 apostles, these are not people who can make mistakes and are human when they're talking about doctrine or, what's important or, policies about what should happen with the children of gay couples. Anyway, very hurtful things have been done there. And it's never, suicides that happen, it's very sad that this has happened, just the faith of this person, it's if you've lost your faith, then that's the problem. It's never the group or that there's actually a problem with something, it's not very self-effacing, so definitely a yes on that one. Number 4, promote feelings of guilt or unworthiness, such as A, identity guilt, B, you are not living up to your potential. That one's definitely true. There's always this, you are, in young women's, I'm a daughter of my Heavenly Father who loves me as I love Him. Oh no, we are daughters of our Heavenly Father who loves us as we love Him. We will stand as witnesses of God at all times and in all things and in all places as we strive to live the young women values which are. And it goes on, but so you are, a noble heavenly daughter. And so there can be a lot of feeling of not living up to your potential if you're not doing something spectacular. And even, this is actually something I was thinking, I could read you my patriarchal blessing so you get a particular special blessing that's given to you. And one of my things was that my name was going to be known and respected among the children of men. And I used to just be very overawed by that oh, how could that be me? And am I living up to that? C is your family is deficient. And there's definitely that feeling too. If you don't live in a heteronormative, intact family, then are you going to be able to be with everyone in the next life? There's definitely this feeling of that your family isn't the ideal and it's not perfect the way it is. D, your past is suspect. And I'm sure lots of people who didn't grow up Mormon would have that feeling that it's like, okay, well, before you were Mormon, did you do anything good? Like that there would be this feeling about them. I was Mormon my whole life, so it doesn't really feel like that. E is your affiliations are unwise. And there can be some of that, but I'd say to a lesser extent. F, your thoughts, feelings, actions are irrelevant or selfish. And that can definitely be the case. Social guilt. There's definitely a lot of social guilt. So I've mentioned in some of these other videos, if you have a sleeveless top on, you get a huge amount of judgment. If you're seen with a cup of coffee in hand, lots of judging eyes. So lots of social guilt that would be put on you by that. And H is historical guilt. And I don't think there is as much of that because the belief isn't... that one to me is making me think of perhaps the Catholic Church with original sin, how we basically, because Eve sinned, everyone's a sinner, or all women are sinners. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's not as much of that. It's kind of historical pride more than anything, because it's like, oh, well, we're the ones who chose to come to the earth. It's the 1/3 who went with Satan who were bad or whatever. But definitely a yes to that section. Number 5 is instill fear, such as fear of A, thinking independently. That is a big yes. So there's a big fear to being able to make your own choices, to knowing, okay, well, but what's the right thing to do? Because there's always the choose the right. You're supposed to follow the straight and narrow path. And you might have conflicting things, and there may not actually be a way to reconcile all those things. So you can have a hard time thinking independently because you're trying to navigate through very complicated minefields. Instill fear such as fear of the outside world. That's definitely the case. So there's this fear of being judged by the outside world, being tempted by the outside world, going and being offered a drink, being offered, a smoke or something like that. There's a lot of fear that's instilled about these things. And there's a lot of fear about, oh, well, what type of person would I be if I wasn't Mormon? I remember thinking that a lot, like, oh, I just don't even know. I would be off the rails. I'd be such a, out of control person. But where's the evidence for that? Something built that fear up in myself from then, because I'm out of the church and I'm not off the rails. I'm a pretty reasonable person. Instill fear such as the fear of enemies. And I wouldn't say this is that big. There's not a lot of talk of enemies. But there is more than is warranted. As I talked about, I think it was in the last video, maybe the one before, talking a lot about this kind of persecution complex from back in the 1800s when people were driven out. I remember when I was a kid kind of because of that fear, I used to be afraid that if the Holocaust happened again, it would happen to Mormons, and I was going to be the one in the Holocaust. So that kind of thinking definitely seeps its way through. And still fears such as losing one's salvation. There's definitely a bit of that, although the heavens are not really that bad. Like, I mean, if you don't... Anyway, the heaven structure is a bit different, but I'm not going to go into that. Still fears such as leaving or being shunned by the group. And there is not as much shunning by the group. There's very little of that. But leaving the group is... You're very conditioned to be afraid of that. To be afraid of losing your testimony. You know, like, if you told me when I was 20 that I was going to be out of the church when I was 30, I would just think, oh no, how would I lose my testimony? You know, you're afraid of something like this happening because it seems like it's going to destroy everything, because it's your whole worldview. It's a huge part of your identity, because it's a cult identity. But anyway, it's a huge part of that identity, so it is a huge thing. So leaving the group is, you know, people talk about, oh, she lost her testimony. You know, like that's the way we would talk about things. And then it's still fear of others' disapproval. I think there definitely is a lot of that, because there's so much social status wrapped up in these actions. So if you would be found out to be having sex outside of marriage, well, people are going to be judging you. So you would have fear of that. Number 6, extremes of emotional highs and lows. Love bombing and praise one moment and then declaring you are a horrible sinner. So there's definitely love bombing. So if you come in new to the church, everyone will be very excited about this, want to know all about you, and be very excited about you as a prospect to convert to the church. And so that's definitely, you know, one of the highs. The horrible sinner part, I wouldn't say... No one in the church really likes to be as direct as to call you like a bad person. It's much more subtle than that, I guess. So I would say that one's more of a maybe. Oh, I didn't put a yes on 5. So we're gonna put a maybe. So we won't call that a hard yes. 7 is ritualistic and sometimes public confession of sins. There's no public confession of sin, so that's a no. Ritualistic, there definitely is. So going in, as I've mentioned before, you have a worthiness interview, and there you are probed about all sorts of different areas, and whether you're sinning in those areas, or, you know, if you're maintaining your testimony or whatever. So there's definitely a confession of sins if you have not done well, but it's not quite as strong as like Catholicism, where you just go and supposed to confess on a regular basis. Or I don't know Catholicism. That's just my understanding from limited exposure. And then final, so I put a yes there, but it's not the strongest yes. And number 8 is phobia indoctrination, inculcating irrational fears about leaving the group or questioning the leader's authority, such as A, no happiness or fulfillment possible outside the group. That's a huge yes, which we already talked about. Terrible consequences if you leave. Hell, demon possession, incurable diseases, accidents, suicide, insanity, 10,000 reincarnations, etc. That one's no, there's nothing really like that. It's more that you won't have happiness or fulfillment. It's not really a direct negative like that. C is shunning of those who leave, fear of being rejected by friends and family. And with that one, I think it's actually a bit complicated. So I know that you definitely feel different after you've left the group. And it's kind of just hard because it's basically you're not being mind controlled anymore, but they still are. But you can't really convince someone that they're being mind controlled. It's just, I don't actually understand. This is something that I am very interested in, is what allows somebody an opening to realize that they're being mind controlled type thing. Because for me, it was a long process. It's really funny, because it did begin when I had Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door the first time I came to Australia to visit, and that's when I realized that I'd been emotionally abused by my ex, that he had been doing, emotional control and that sort of thing with me. And then it was kind of a year later that then I was like, oh hey, is all this that I've been doing with the church, is that the same as it was with my ex? And it was, and that's how I left the church, basically. But anyway, so shunning, there's no direct shunning. It's not like Jehovah's Witnesses. But I think there is still a fear because the relationships change. They do. There's no way of getting around that. The relationships change when you leave the church. But it's not necessarily all one way. It's not all them to you. It's also you to them. So we'll put that as just a question mark. We won't say a strong yes on that. D is never a legitimate reason to leave. Those who leave are weak, undisciplined, unspiritual, worldly, brainwashed by family or counselor, or seduced by money, sex, or rock and roll. And that's definitely the case. People try to you hear reasons why members say that people leave the church, and it's very different from what ex-Mormons will say about why they left the church. So there is very much that it's never really a good enough reason, and they always think you're going to come back as well. That's the part that really is kind of annoying, that it's no trust of you saying, nope, I'm done, but like, oh no, I know you'll come back. Well, you're wrong. But anyway, it's also kind of an arrogant thing to say, so that one's a definite yes. And E is threats of harm to ex-member and family. And there is emotional harm that will happen, such as, if you speak out against things, you can be excommunicated, which would then impact your family. But not as strong. We'll just put question mark for that. So, but it's definitely a yes for the overall section, just because of that no happiness or fulfillment outside the group, which is so strong. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because we had the maybe for 6, so we'll call it 7 out of 8. So 7 out of 8 for emotion control. So that makes it a total, let's see, look at our total first. 11 and 8. 52, and then we have, 25, 36, 43. So, on the byte model, according to my very simple calculation, which is just 1 per section here, except in information control because they only had 6 there and I made that out to 19. Their Mormonism is 43 out of 52 occult. So, pretty strong cult-like behavior there. It's not like a death cult, such as the Hillbop comment. It's probably not going, there's some of these things sound horrendous back in behavior control. Threatening rape, making you do rape, corporal punishment, tattooing. There's nothing like that. Although there did actually used to be, I think, where you would do a symbol to say that you were going to cut your own throat rather than reveal what you learned in the temple. Something like that, which is a bit weird. Anyway, but that wasn't ever my experience. So they are trying to get rid of some of these things, but 43 out of 52 still have quite a few. So Mormonism is a cult. It was according to the 15 signs of a destructive cult, and it is according to the byte model as well. So if you are Mormon yourself, and you've made it through all these videos, you are probably thinking you might want to reconsider that, because I assume you would have turned it off earlier if you weren't thinking that. So, I hope I can help you. And, my life is so much better since I left the church. I am me, and that's what's great. And it's my identity, not the cult identity. So, I really like the byte model. It's been great to go through it just to get a really detailed look to bring up some of these different things. So thank you all for going on this journey with me. And brought up a few different things, so if there's other things you're interested to hear about my Mormon or ex-Mormon journey, please let me know down in the comments, and we can chat about that another time. And I will see you next time. Which,